Good evening. Welcome to a very important program of the International Grapevine. This is your host, Wallingford Lee. We want to take the opportunity tonight to talk a little bit about the school system and how it impacts with the children them going back to school in New York and almost all over the country because of this tremendous coronavirus, the impact that it will have on the student, the impact that it will have on the teachers, and the pros and cons involved in that. So today's program, we're going to give it the name of the critical issues facing the education system with coronavirus. We're pleased to have on our program a veteran that's been on our program before with a great record with the issues that we have put him through in the interviews, and he's come alive all the time. And our audience always ask about him. So here we are again with Brother Hank Williams, who happens to be the professor of English and African Studies in Lehman College, who has been kind enough to be on our program about 3 or 4 times, and our audience like him, and so do I. Hank, welcome to our program.
Thank you. I appreciate the invite. Always great to spend time with you.
That's a good thing. Well, Hank, we want to talk a little bit about the school system, but I guess my first question to you was, everybody now, how dangerous you consider this coronavirus thing?
Obviously, very. By not only the amount of people who it's killed. One of the things that I think a lot of folks don't realize, and you're seeing more and more stories about it. As a matter of fact, we just talked with somebody in my building who had it, is a lot of the people who come down with the thing and recover sometimes have very, very serious long-term debilitating results of it. For instance, the person in my building we talked to has some heart issues that they're not exactly sure, whether or not they're going to be resolved. And I know other people who've had partially, I guess, because it lodges in the lungs, who've had long-term pulmonary and breathing issues and all sorts of other things. So, it's something that has to be taken very seriously.
Unfortunately, you're 100% right with it. A lot of people doesn't take it seriously. Yesterday, Labor Day, there were a lot of beaches open and people partying and moving around and touching instead of keeping a distance. So obviously they put their life in danger because you don't know who have this virus or not. Mm-hmm. What type of challenges with this virus is this for the educational system in New York City? Before you answer, we got to give a lot of credit to our governor who really brought back New York after all these problems. Mm-hmm. So this is a big challenge for the school system and also for the teachers. What are the major challenges you think we're facing in a situation like that?
Well, the challenges are several, and a lot of them are honestly structural, meaning they're big picture issues in terms of how schooling is done and the type of infrastructure, just type of buildings you have and places that you have to do schools. And that's particularly an issue in urban areas where you don't have a whole lot of extra space that you can expand out and use. New York is not a temperate climate, so you have severe issues in terms of weather and that sort of thing, which make and also noise, and there are some safety concerns. So all that makes the idea of going outside, which a lot of people are touting as a possible solution, problematic. Not because it's an awful thing to take students outside, but because what you really need, when you're trying to run a coherent school schedule, you really need things that are going to work reliably. And when you for instance, you have to take weather or rain or safety or any of those other things into consideration, then it falls apart fairly quickly. So So that's one of it. The other piece is in the buildings themselves, and a lot of city school buildings are very old, and even some of the newer ones, partially just because of budget issues, do not have adequate ventilation systems. And this isn't anything new. They didn't have adequate ventilation beforehand. As a matter of fact, this is something on the college level that we brought up in the spring. There were a lot of campuses for years that the ones with newer buildings have been constructed where the buildings are essentially sealed, or most of the classrooms do not have windows that can be opened, and the ventilation systems aren't really up to par, and would require a lot of work and a lot of money to even bring them into basic functionality, much less bring them up to a standard that would be consistent with dealing with the virus and ventilating it.
So for all intents and purposes, if we break it down, it's going to be a tough thing for the kids, for the teachers, because I don't think we're really truly prepared. If we go back to the things that you just framed, are extremely important things, and and it's a very difficult thing. And I think one of the key components that you mentioned, a good portion of the school system in the Big Apple are old schools. So this is a tough one. This is a tough one. And I think, to the best of my knowledge, I think the school system was supposed to open today, but I think they kind of move it back to the 21st of September. So I would imagine there will be some type of plan put together by the people that run the school system to adhere to good safety things to protect the students and the teachers. I would think so. So I imagine that some type of preparation will come out, and what have you. I know most of the schools in Florida and certain parts, they are doing it where the students stay home, and the connection education system is via computer with teachers. How do you feel about that?
Well, there are a couple of things to deal with. One is that the most recent agreement they've come to is that the teachers actually showed up in New York City public schools. That is, actually showed up today for training and professional development, and just to deal with some of the logistical things. And as you said, the official start of school, at least as of right now, has been pushed off until the 21st. The problem is that I think principals are only right now getting in engineering reports of what kind of shape their schools are in. So that really doesn't leave very much time to remediate things or anything like that. In terms of the computer thing, it's very difficult, because I do think we need to acknowledge a few things. Number one, it is very tough for parents who are still working, particularly those who have to work outside the home, but even those who are inside and don't have flexible schedules, to actually properly monitor and facilitate what students are doing, which sometimes it isn't either very obvious of what students need to do, particularly as classes change, or simply just keeping them focused and directed and on task, particularly with younger students. And that's a real concern, and that's not something that I don't think anybody has a good answer for. That's one. Two, you still also have inequities in terms of who has access to the technology, and I guess here most specifically reliable high-speed internet, or even just an adequate space to do it, and who does not. And we are talking primarily about New York City, but because you have a much wider viewership, I want to acknowledge that in some ways that process may even be worse in rural areas, particularly in the rural South, where they don't even have that sort of infrastructure. Here it's largely just a matter of equity. There are a lot of people who simply can't afford high-speed internet, but you can figure out a way to get it to them, either by subsidizing it One of the things that our university did was send out hundreds of these little portable Wi-Fi hotspots. It looks like about 3 cell phones stacked on top of each other and works on cellular technology. So we sent those out to, or actually they're sending those out, I think, right now to some students to help with that. So so you have the issue of what is a problem structurally in terms of actually facilitating the learning, and 2, who has access to it. That said, I'm not sure that in a lot of cases anybody has a much better idea of what to do. And I also think in terms of the impact on students, granted, I should say I'm not an expert in this area in terms of child psychology and that sort of thing. But I think in terms of the wider public safety concerns, there's a big difference between whether this is an interim solution and we just have to figure out how to make this work for possibly a year, or if it turns into being a long-term thing. And in that case, you're definitely going to have to figure out something better and tackle the structural issues. But if it's a relatively shorter term thing, it may be, it seems like in a lot of cases, it's the better of not too many good choices.
Well, it goes without saying, this virus caught all of us by surprise. And a lot of people think that it was something that would just go away, just like that'll go away tomorrow, it'll go away next week. It's been here with us now since January, and it really got to us, I said, late February. I'm concerned with the kids and working with computers if their parents is not home to supervise them, to make sure they're doing what they're supposed to do and they're not on their phones or playing games. That's a difficult situation in some case. Then you have the other part that you frame, which I think is a big one. Certain rural areas, maybe not in New York, but certain part of the country, it's got to be very tough if they don't have the high-speed technology with computers or Wi-Fi and stuff like that. That definitely put everything in the backside of it. Then when you talk about the other part of it, if we open up certain schools them too fast, even though some of the political people think just open a school and worry about it later, you have situation where the kids are exposed to certain things and the teachers are also exposed to certain things, and it's not a safe environment right now. So all of this brings a lot of chaos and crisis to the school system and also to the children. So what is a safe pattern going forward from here based on all these things?
That's very difficult for me to assess, and that may be something where I think I probably think you need regional or local determination, which is sort of what they've been doing now. What would help is better direction and better coordination and much more leadership from the federal government, because there are some things that you have to have some sort of centralized planning to tackle. That may not necessarily mean dictating exactly what everybody can or should be doing, but you really need somebody whose job it is to look at the big picture. And in that case, like it or not, it's the federal government who has the mandate and the resources to do it. In our case, honestly, I think there are a few things, because I also didn't mention the very real issue, which a lot of people are feeling, and I can certainly understand that, is that even though it's actually not the mission of schools, schools do function as childcare, or at least de facto childcare for a lot of people. So that's an issue too. I think there are a few things. Number one, to deal with the child care issue, we need to extend some of the unemployment payments, for people going forward, at least for another quarter or so, until we get a better handle on this thing and maybe see which way the virus is going. and that's not only just to deal with this, that's also because there are still several sectors of people who are working in areas where it's not safe to go back to work now, and it may not be safe to go back for a while. Number one being bars, some restaurants, some entertainment venues, et cetera, et cetera. So that's one piece. Two, one of the things that New York City started in the spring was having what they called enrichment centers, where they basically opened up places that weren't actually doing schooling functions, but it was basically safe places where children could go, and they tried to enforce social distancing. They had Wi-Fi and that sort of thing, so they could actually do their work there in a safe, supervised environment, and the parents could go to work, but they didn't actually have to go into schools to do that. So I think that's something that needs to be done also. And by the way, I would say both of these things are existing structural problems in society, because there's only, public school is only mandated in New York State for 180 days per year. And that spread, from September through the end of June. So you already have the existing problem of childcare for a lot of parents. And I think one of the things we need to think about is you have to deal with that as a political issue on its own. And I think you should be dealing with that as a social/societal issue, because all of us even if we don't have children now, all of us were children at once, and our parents had to face that sort of issue. And increasingly, you're in a situation where even if it's not a single parent household, both parents actually have to work. And that's going to exist after we get over the coronavirus. So one of the things, one possible positive thing we might take out of this going forward is if that actually wakes people up to this long-term need we've had for that. And in terms of the schooling itself, I think one thing is, it doesn't necessarily need to be all or nothing. And you can actually have hybrid approaches, and you can also prioritize, say, who goes in and who doesn't, because part of the issue is simply just being able to adequately space people out. And that's the thing when you have this whole crush of students going back to school. So, say you might at first prioritize, say, special needs children, or maybe younger children or something like that, or children/students who actually do need the socialization of being out of the house. But if you don't have everybody in the building, then you're able to spread them out a little bit more. And maybe some of the buildings that are now underutilized because students who don't physically have to come in, or if they're a little older and better able to manage things on their own and don't need parental supervision, or don't need as much parental supervision, if you still have them going virtually, then that frees up extra space that can be used. So I think it's going to have to be, number one, I think it's going to have to be a variety of approaches that we look at, but I think it needs to be looked at holistically.
No question about it. I think you brought up quite a few important things and that we're going to continue talking about on the grapevine. One of the biggest one that you brought up is about the involvement of the federal government. I think it's essential. I think it's important. However, unfortunately, some of them in the government have not taken this thing serious. Now that it's a crisis, that's exactly what it's, a crisis, they're concerned. We'll be right back on International Grapevine as we continue talking about the crisis and the situation with the students coming back to school and with this virus, which here in America, we have not been able to control. Even though we're working on so many different things, we still don't have an answer. We'll be right back on International Grapevine.
A school district on the rise. More than 1,000 students now forced to stay home after dozens tested positive during the first few days of class. Recent photos show students sitting and walking closely together, even taking part in a fire drill with no social distancing. The decision to reopen classrooms igniting debate across the country. One school district in New Jersey going all remote due to a lack of teachers. 375 teachers now saying they won't return because of COVID fears. The same anxiety felt in Texas.
And we're back here in International Grapevine talking about the situation facing the teachers, the students going back to school, and overall a concern as a parent, concern as a citizen. Where do we go from here? This is a terrible virus that came from out of nowhere. Some people claim it came from China. Some claim that it came from Europe. I really don't care. Is to find a solution for it. Hopefully our leader, our president, who every day keeps saying that we're working on something, and I hope we are, that it's close. As a matter of fact, I think yesterday he said in the news that there could be some type of solution 2 or 3 days before the election. I hope so, because our children are exposed to it, our teachers are exposed to it, and the people in the street. And we as responsible citizens also have to wise up, wear the mask when we go out, keep a distance, and what have you is extremely important. Our concern in this program is about our children that's going back to school and stuff like that. We are lucky to have our special guest, who happens to be Hank Williams. He's a professor at Lehman College, and he has been kind enough to be in our program a couple of times. And he's here today and has imparted some extremely important measures to be taken, and some that we need to look at very closely. And because as we continue navigating through these type of things, and what picture you think our president can play in this situation?
Well, several things. One, I think, is dealing with very squarely with the issue of finances. New York City, New York City is in an extremely precarious state if there isn't another stimulus package approved that includes aid for cities. And I know we're talking primarily about schools, but that's just going to have ripple effects all the way around, and really just devastating, crippling of a lot of services that people need. And it's actually not just us. Our particular budget hole is probably the largest, if not one of the largest, only because we have the largest population in the country by at least a factor of 2, I believe, over LA. But cities around the country are going to be dealing with this, even some of the smaller ones. And as a matter of fact, it may hit them even harder. For us, it's an issue because we have very extensive social services, but we also have, kind of have a very extensive tax base, and not everybody has that. So that's one. But two, I think they could do a lot better and should do a lot better, simply just listening to the science, and I think amplifying a lot of what are best practices people should be doing in terms of dealing with this. And those are things that really don't cost anything, or at least they cost relatively nothing, to I think have national messaging that's coherent from the top, even just telling people to do very simple things as wear masks regularly, that would help too. And on the education front, I covered that a little bit, but I think a lot of it would simply be using their resources to be able to coordinate things, and and have some best practices and logistics that they could pass down to local schools, sort of like OSHA does with workplaces and employment. They essentially standardize a lot of things so everybody doesn't have to go and reinvent, try to tap into expertise that they don't have, and they can just get some of that from the government. And that's one of the things the Department of Education should actually be doing.
Well, one of the things that concern me is one of the things we just said a few minutes ago, a possible package coming out from the government to help parents and stuff like that. We know for a fact that the Democrats and the senators have been meeting over that. I don't think they came to a resolution yet. I think it's extremely important that they come to some type of resolution. There are certain people that need the money to pay rent. Not everybody can afford it. There are a certain amount of people lay off. I think it. Thank God the unemployment people dropped from 10 to 8% right now, but that's still a big number. You have to put food on the table for the children. You have to buy clothes for them, and more importantly, you have to have a roof over their head. So these are the type of things, and we know for a fact that Republicans hate to mention where you talk about these type of things of helping. They think everybody should swim for themselves, but this is dangerous. This coronavirus took all of us by surprise, and I mean all of us without being classified whether you're Latino, black, or white. It has affected all of us, and it will continue to do so until we can find some type of thing or vaccination to stop it and fight it. I think one of the key components that you mentioned is a little bit about the sciences. Would you like to see the type of report Dr. Fauci used to give on a daily basis? Maybe that should be something that should come back again, where the scientists come in and give updates back and forth so people can know what's going on.
That might be helpful. I don't necessarily know that that's the most urgent thing for the average person, because I know here in New York for for several weeks. I don't know. I actually can't tell you exactly how long it went on, but Governor Cuomo and our mayor in New York City, Bill de Blasio, were having daily press conferences and updates, and a lot of those were very useful in terms of getting out exactly what the situation is, what was happening on the ground, urging people to be very safe, and putting forward the changing science as they understood it. The problem with that is that the further you go on and further you get into this thing, there tends to be a problem of information. Number one, of information overload, and it becomes very difficult for people to process all that. What I kind of had in mind and was thinking is that I think there just needs to be better support of science and proven approaches, and an aggressive, although measured approach, supported at the federal level from the White House. And I think that would go a long way, because you even see some of that in terms of the messaging that you were just referring to, of Trump suggesting that there could be a vaccine very soon, and even hinting possibly even a couple days before the election, which only a fool would read as something other than political pandering, and something to shore himself up. Here's the thing. The problem with that is that if you actually listen to the scientists, they'll tell you stuff does not work that way. I mean, there are various things they can do to accelerate trials and that sort of thing. And, by pouring more money into it and having a little bit more attention on it, they can work faster than they ordinarily might. But things just don't happen on a deadline. So that's one piece of it. The more dangerous part of it is that if you have people not believing that the process is legitimate, and it was either politicized or rushed, or what's done is incomplete, then people aren't actually going to have faith in the product that comes out, and that can be very deadly. Not only in terms of if he has enough weight to put something out that isn't quite safe, which right now I actually don't think I actually don't think the career people in charge would do. But the worst thing is if people start having a reaction and saying, "Well, I'm not going to take it." They rush this thing out only so it could come out before election, or only so he could get reelected and that sort of thing. And I don't trust that. Then that's going to backfire and be almost just as bad as if there wasn't a vaccine produced, which, right now we actually don't know. I mean, it seems promising from what I've heard, but we actually don't know. We actually don't know for sure whether or not they can successfully find something, although it seems.
Well, a vaccine could be close, but also when you create a vaccine, you have to test it. It has to be tested, and I don't think if you do testing in a new brand vaccine, and I'm not a scientist, I hope we find one to save life. It's going to take a while to know if it works. It's going to take a while to know if it's effective. So to say that we'll have one by now in early November, gee, I hope so. But is that the answer? How wouldn't we know if it worked? Where has it been tested? Because, a little bit that I have read, it takes a while to build an effective vaccination. It's not something that's going to take a month or less than a month. It's complicated because they have to do a lot of tests, and we hope and pray that they do find one. We have lost over 189,000 lives here. We have about 6.5 million for the people in the United States that have this coronavirus. So this thing is a very, very, very serious thing. And, my worries are about the young generation, the young kids I'm going to school. What could happen to them? What could happen to them boarding buses, not keeping a distance and stuff like that? As we start talking again about the school system, what type of separation you think once we start the 21st of September, a class would be? Because usually a class has 30 to 35 kids in most cases, maybe 25. How would they separate something like that, distancing? Is there any way or any feeling you have about that?
Well, the problem is it's simple mathematics. You can't. There's the rooms are certain sizes, so even assuming you have effective ventilation and things like that, you just have the task of physically keeping students away from each other. And actually it's one of the things I'm hearing from people who have opened up is it's not the classroom is one thing. The bigger problem is the hallways, especially when classes all let out at the same time. And they're and that's what teachers in that situation are really, really worried about, because students are just being let out in mass, and there really isn't a good way to keep it orderly or spread it out. And I mean, the last thing I'll say is, here's the thing. Okay, one of the jobs of educational administrators and people who know a little bit better is to anticipate the failings of what students and younger people are going to do. We know that they're at a certain level of judgment and at a certain level of emotional development, and you can set down reasonable rules, but if part of your plan does not reasonably foreseeing things that are going to be very difficult, if not impossible for them to comply with, then your plan isn't very good. So you have to anticipate the fact that they're going to want to talk, they're going to want to congregate together, and all the types of things that that young children and students do.
Well, I got approximately 2 minutes. Do you think there should be some type of alternate schedule? Probably that will help a little bit because of the amount of students. Will some type of alternate situation work? Maybe some come certain days, some come another day, like skips, another way to fit everyone in. I know it'll be difficult for the teachers to keep up with that, but I guess there's got to be some type of plan.
Well, I think you framed it fairly well, both in terms of the possible plan and in terms of the wrinkle. that is indeed one of the things that's planned for New York City. You have logistical problems in terms of just making all that work for the students, because it's really like musical chairs, and also for the teachers, because you physically need more teachers to do that, since you're essentially asking them to do two things at the same time and be teaching both in person on some days and alternately via Zoom, and that just doesn't work.
No, no. Well, Hank, we've run out of time, but on behalf of the family of the Grapevine, I want to take this opportunity to tell you thank you so much. You put a lot of good things on the table. I hope those who watch our program and understand what you are talking about and the questions that I'm putting together, will, these type of ideas then can get to higher up, and they can get a few ideas from you and other people who know the system. I don't have words, so thank you for that.
I appreciate the opportunity. Let's do it again.
We certainly will. And again, before I say goodnight to the family of Grapevine, I want to take this opportunity to really thank all the doctors, the nurses, them in the hospitals, and the volunteers that have done a great job in New York City and all over this nation, saving life and working tireless to help people who come up with this virus. And again, this is Wallingford Lee saying good night for the International Grapevine, and thank you for watching our show. We hope to see you again next week at the same place and the same time. Good night.